um, outsourcing, right? And outsourcing sounds boring, but literally everybody at every level, at every size, does outsourcing. Individuals outsource stuff, and families outsource stuff, and companies and governments and countries outsource stuff.
Indeed, they do.
And
And
right,
some
everybody,
people,
nobody does all of everything for themselves. It's just not possible, right? Especially in the
no,
modern society, right?
no. And some people
So
do it really well, and some people don't do it so well, which we can
yeah,
talk about too.
yeah, we can do that too, right? And it's sort of
Yeah.
delegation is kind of a flavor of that. But I mean, if you break it down by the broadest categories, everybody outsources three things, right?
Hmm.
They outsource services and analysis and insights.
Hmm.
Hold on now. So more bluntly, like let's make it plain. It's Friday afternoon, and my brain's gone. Right? Everyone outsources labor to other people. They have
Right.
other people do labor for them. Everybody outsources thinking to other
Hmm.
people because you can't possibly think about everything, right? And
Right.
then everyone outsources to some degree, and mostly a lot. Everyone outsources creativity to other people as well. So,
Yes.
you can call it services, analysis, and insights, or you can call it labor, thinking, and creativity. But everybody outsources that, which also means that everybody who does any kind of work in society is insourcing, right?
Hmm.
Taking on someone else's one of those three categories. You're doing work for someone else. I mean, if I go and here's an example, right? Um, I never, in fact, I don't think I have ever deep fried French fries myself, right? I mean, you got to buy the deep fryer or have a really big pot and worry about. You need special tools, even if you're using a tot. You need
Yeah,
like a
kind of.
special kind of thing that scoops them out, right? Thermometer and stuff. You gotta takes a while to heat up the oil. It takes a while to cool down the oil when you're done. It's kind of a
Hmm.
mess for cleanup. I live 2.5 minutes drive from a McDonald's and a bunch of other fast food places because I'm sort of my suburbs just sort of off of a cluster. It's been around for like 40 years and it all got built later.
Yep.
And I mean, why would I ever do that for myself when I can just drive around the corner and get hot French fries? Like I could be out and home and have the French fries eaten in less time than it would take to heat up the oil by
Yeah, there's
doing it
no
at home,
real
right?
reason to do it yourself.
Which means the people who make the French fries, God bless them, right? I've outsourced that labor to them. All of us outsource all kinds of labor. We think about, oh, well, I'm going to have someone clean my house. I mean, yes,
Right.
that's an example, but you outsource almost all labor. You outsource all of the labor in every factory of everything that you ever purchased as a product. And
I
all
mean,
services, right, were outsourced at some
yeah.
point.
The other thing I was gonna say is, any of the things, if anybody has listened to us carefully over the week here, what do we talk about all the time? Really, we're talking about staying in your zone of brilliance
Yeah,
and not getting out of that. So outsourcing is a great way to keep you in your zone of brilliance. That's
yes.
how you.
But on the flip side of that,
Yep.
it's like it's human nature that it's very, very, very hard to get
And it's
outside
good too.
our own head and
Yep.
look at ourselves with any kind of objectivity.
Hmm.
And so talks like this are helpful because once it's sort of categorized and you can decide where you are in those three categories. So, I mean, anybody who performs labor for other people is obviously in the labor or services category for
Yes.
outsourcing. And then um, the thinking or analysis part is sometimes, first of all, nobody can think about everything in life anyway. But for an awful lot of stuff, we rely on other people to do our thinking for us, right?
You
And
certainly
there's
do.
nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, when one country invades another country, and I don't want to talk about politics, right? Never current events or whatever. But
No.
when one country does something, there are always experts on TV who have spent their life or their career understanding and watching and comprehending what's happening in this little niche, and we turn to them as a source of information. They've done the thinking on it. We outsource the thinking to them because the time it would take for us to learn and sort of amalgamate and condense and distill everything we would need is it's never going to be worth our time. So we outsource an awful lot of thinking. And you could say, you wouldn't necessarily, because there are exceptions, right? I mean, a heart surgeon technically is performing labor, but you wouldn't say that they're on like the bottom part of the pyramid that we go back to over and over again, right? But you can be very specialized and the labor part and do very well as a business or a career or whatever. But generally speaking, labor is where is one level, and then a little bit up from that as far as like maybe income or reach or influence or scale, and then
Hmm.
thinking is above that, and then it seems to be pretty like a smaller group at the top where we outsource creativity, where we wish that someone had solved a problem that we've recently become aware of, and we pay someone for a solution to that problem. And the solution might be a product, it might be a service they do for you, it might be a book or a movie, right? But
Or a video.
it could just be like a different way of thinking about something. It could be
Yeah,
a free video on LinkedIn where
could be
someone talks
anything.
about the three categories of outsourcing.
Hmm.
But we outsource creativity like all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. There was a book I read, I don't know, 20 something years ago. It wasn't a particularly great book, but I loved where the author's sort of head was at and going with it. The book was called, I got it on Amazon. I think it was one of my first ever Amazon purchases. It's called How to Get Paid to Think. I got to go look up that book. I wonder if it's still in print. But I mean, that was the first time that I had ever come across that concept that you could get paid not for making something or doing something or being something, but just for coming up with stuff for other people. They come to you and they say, here's my problem. I've got this and I've got that. Here's my assets. I've got this and I got that. Like, what are my options here? Help me figure out, help me think through what I'm doing or think it through for me.
I've
And
been paid to
just
think
the
for
title of that
years.
book is,
So I totally understand that. Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's true.
So, I mean, which category do you think you're in? Like your business, I mean, your
Oh,
main
I'm
business.
definitely, I can see a couple places that I'm in, but not because I'm particularly good at it. So like, I'm definitely in the I'm paid
Wait,
to think,
wait, hold on. Did you just say you're in categories, but not because you're good at those categories?
not because I'm particularly great at it, and I'll explain that in a second.
Yeah, okay.
So the category that I'm in the
Right,
most is I am one of these people who's paid to think for people and help them put things together. I've worked as a marketing consultant and in video and helping to keep technology simple for people for decades now.
right,
So I'm definitely in that category. But some of the categories I'm in are categories I'm in because I outsource those those things that we talked about. So, like for instance, I we do a lot of creative work.
right,
We're starting an agency, and so we've had to find creative people to help us with that side of work. However, funny enough, some of that stuff has actually worn off on me. I'm finding because I've now been outsourcing some of that stuff, I've become far more creative,
right.
which does happen. So some of it does tend to rub off on you. But those are kind of the two areas that I would say that I'm the most involved in.
I bet a lot of busy people occupy two of the three categories most of the
Yeah.
time, right?
Yep.
Right. I don't. I think there are relatively few people who do sort of like thinking and creativity as their two categories.
I think there's a lot, especially a lot of,
But
I know a lot of copywriters who do thinking and creativity
well, I would say that a lot of copywriting is labor,
and a lot of,
right? 98%
yeah.
of copywriters are, you know, I don't mean to, they're content writers,
Yes.
right? To me, a copywriter has a specific definition. It's someone who can, with words, get someone interested and then get that person to perform an action. People who are writing blog posts and stuff, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy work. It is not easy work, and I'm not great at it, and I try to not do it,
Mm.
right? But I mean, that's a service business. Anything where you can be priced in cents per word is a service business. So they're sort of in the they're kind of in the same category. I would say I'm in the creativity and services category, and right, I don't normally have or have been given or have to take in a whole bunch of information. It's like raw data and like dig into it, do the analysis, and figure something out. Usually, I'm on the creative side and on the services side of actually like
Mm.
doing writing a script, writing someone's webinar for them, whatever, right?
Right.
So yeah, I would say most copywriters live in the but like copywriters, but content writers, I don't think I think they're in the services, but also the thinking
Yes.
and less the creativity. They're not supposed to really come up with like brand new original stuff. Their job is to, okay, I'm now going to write. My client wants me to write, and this new client they're in healthcare, and so now I've got to learn, about healthcare. and
Mm.
start reading all kinds of articles and books and whatever, and understand the terminology and the voice and what's expected, right? That's all thinking work, and then they perform
Sure.
services based on that.
I mean, I'm realizing too, as the more we talk about this, I'm also kind of in the third category in the analysis side. I mean, I
So
certainly
special, John.
well, I have to understand some of the analysis
Yeah,
in order to be able to direct what's going on or what I need. So we're all kind of peripherally in everything. I would
yeah,
think at least two categories.
yeah.
Yep,
And so, I mean,
very true.
for one of those categories, that's where, if it's like anything in life, right? If you're there because you chose to be there, you understand why you're there, and that's where you're sort of doubling down, then
Hmm.
it doesn't make any difference what category you're in as far as
No,
outsourcing is. If you're there by default or because someone else has put you there, that's not nearly as good a situation. And if
that's very
only
true.
if you're lucky do you end up in the category that you should be in and want to be in, and where
Yeah,
sort of your strengths are magnified and your weaknesses are, covered over or not important.
I would say
But yeah,
that's true.
understanding if you're in the thinking side, the creativity side, or the services labor side, like hugely important.
Hugely important.
You can walk through your life and everyone you talk to and everyone you interact with and everything you buy and do, right? Everyone falls into at least one of those three categories and falls into one of them mostly.
Yeah, at least one
Yeah.
for sure. And it's funny. I think a lot of us when we think of outsourcing stuff, we kind of see the TV. Have you ever seen the TV show Outsourcing?
You mean like that sitcom from years and years back?
Years and years back, we kind of
Yes.
think of some of these things. So
Outsourcing? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, a lot of us kind of look at it that way, but it's really become quite different. Over the years, some people do it really, really well. One example that kind of hits me. I don't know who you have for your cell phone company that you work with, but many of them, either have an inside group that does their support, or they have people from out of the country that work on their customer
Right.
support. And one of the ones that's been shocking to me that I think does outsourcing really, really well is T-Mobile. When I first started my
Mm.
T-Mobile plan, I could tell that they had an outsourcing group in the Philippines that handled all of their call center work. And they're just so polite, so professional, so
Right.
well educated on what they needed to do. They were just great. But I think so many get it wrong when they try to put their outsourcing together, and they don't take into account a lot of times, especially if they're doing the labor side of it, what it looks like to the customer. They don't think about what the customer experience is going to be like.
Right.
So that's the only thing that kind of gives you the downside thing on outsourcing. But at the same time, as long as you work through what the customer experience is going to be, it can be amazing. And I think they're a great example of it.
Yeah. And then I guess, on the theme of getting outside of your head and looking back, just try to look at yourself objectively, right? If you understand what other people are looking for or what category they think you're in, then you have a better chance of delivering what it is that they expect.
Yes.
And then, compensation follows. So if people are expecting you to perform labor, and I'm just trying to come up with like any sort of labor service, like mow your lawn. Here's one, right? So, I mean, in most of the U.S. anyway, there are many of us have a company that comes and at least mows the grass and does the landscaping and kind of stuff, right?
Hmm.
And it's a very different experience if you hire a company to just come and mow the grass, and then they come back and say, "Hey, because we also do this other stuff, we went ahead and did it." Right? So
Yeah, that
we
was
went
very
ahead and pruned the trees and weeded and we've sculpted your garden and all this stuff. It's like, I just needed the grass mowed, right? You guys, to me, live in the services category. I did not come into this expecting you to be in the creativity category.
right.
And so
Right.
we have a disconnect there. There's nothing wrong with moving up in the value chain on
No.
that. But if the customer expects you to be in one place and you're in a different place, or your boss expects you to be in one place
Mm,
and you're in a different place, then there's a disconnect that is not going to work out over time.
that's true. unless
Yeah.
you make that disconnect, well, what they would perceive as a disconnect known. So like there's a lot of
Right.
using the same example, there's a lot of landscapers now that do the tree trimming. They
Yes.
do sidewalks and masonry work, and gosh, some of them even put in pools, all kinds of things,
Yeah.
ponds.
It's
But yeah,
important,
there,
their positioning and, like,
yeah,
communicating that up front, right?
yes,
It's very
yes,
hard to
yes,
change a customer's expectation of you after the fact.
correct. So the positioning thing up
Yeah.
front is very, very, very important. Hey, we don't just mow lawns; we do this other stuff too.
Right.
So
And on the other end of the scale, there are people who just come in and will design your property, right?
right,
You should have this many trees here, and these flowers would go here, and we'll have like a these kind of symmetrical shapes here. And they don't mow anybody's grass. In fact, they don't do anything except do the design, right? The creative stuff, and then
right,
hand it off back to you. And similar to how an architect doesn't build your house, right?
yep.
You have a contractor for that. The architect like does the first step and then hands it off, and then someone else actually executes it.
And then again, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the company that just says, you know what, I just want to do lawn. All I want to
Right.
focus on is mowing your lawn,
Yeah.
and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being a specialist and doing that one thing really, really great.
Right. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Right? You
Go
live in
ahead.
like a suburb where like people come and mow your neighbor's lawns,
Oh gosh, that's all I see around here
right?
all the time.
Has
Somebody
anyone
mowing this lawn.
ever come to you and made the pitch, "Hey, it's cheaper for us and cheaper for you if a whole bunch of houses in this neighborhood all sign up with us"?
Of course,
I've never had anyone make that pitch. And
of
my
course.
neighborhood's been here for 40 years,
Wow, that's amazing. I get
right?
that pitch all the time,
But, like,
especially not.
basically, like, the way real estate agents these days tend to sort of, like, farm territories,
Mhm.
and they'll specialize in particular, like, parts of a city or even, like, particular neighborhoods, but I've never had, landscaping companies make the deal or, like, make the pitch. There's probably, I don't know, 4
Well,
or
it's
500
funny you should
houses
say
within 2
that.
miles of me.
Not a landscaping company, but I have had window companies make that pitch. I have had the lawn fertilizer,
Right, or
lawn
storm
companies
damage
that do
people, but
that.
they're not offering you a discount and explaining up front,
No,
"Hey, we're trying to, like,
not really.
saturate this neighborhood." But
No,
to
pest
me, I mean
control people.
right.
Never a
But I mean, a
landscaper though.
landscaper, a lot of their cost is just the time and fuel to get their people
Yeah,
and their equipment into a street.
and it's funny, the landscaper would actually make the most sense, but I've never, ever had that pitch from a landscaper,
Yeah, to me, like, why
which
would
is
you not
funny.
come in and try to saturate a suburb,
Yeah,
right?
you
You'd be
would, you
better off
would.
and they'd be better off.
Because if you can just take your mower off once and just drive to all the neighboring houses,
Exactly.
it's genius. I
Yeah,
think it's funny, especially around here in New Hampshire, there's a lot of people turning to mobile service businesses. So I have an RV. I have a guy who comes to my house and works on my RV.
right,
There's not a lot of those guys around, and the reason that they like it is because they can go different. They're not tied to any particular location. They can move around. The bad side to that is you use a lot of gas. You have to run from place to place, which could be
right.
tens, 50s, hundreds of
Especially now
miles.
for the rest of this year, it's gonna be
Yeah.
gas is gonna be expensive.
Yeah. I mean, it could be a lot of different places. So,
Yeah,
and we even have mobile veterinarians, the same thing. So I would think for any of those businesses, the most brilliant strategy that they could use would be, hey, I'm in your neighborhood. Do you have neighbors that need veterinary care too?
yeah,
We could just come and take care of everybody.
hmm,
Yeah. More companies should think about that for sure.
yeah. Also, I guess if you were in landscaping and a big part of your cost was transportation of the equipment. They all have trailers and stuff.
Sure.
Sometimes
Sure.
2 trucks have to show up to bring all the equipment, right? You could have a company that just transported the equipment, like had a very large, like you could get almost like, a very large truck that
Yeah.
could carry multiple of those big mowers at once and just transport them around so that then the landscapers just needed a small pickup or even a car, right? To drive their people around to do the work. I'm
You
thinking
could.
about landscapers that have crews, not it's just like one guy who, with his own pickup truck who's going around people's houses.
Yeah. Usually
You
I
can
just aim with these
disaggregate,
monstrous trailers.
right, the components of the business, and outsource. It reminds me of a couple of years ago. this house and every house on the street, basically, up until my house happens to be at sort of end of where construction stopped, and then like 10 years later, construction started on like another part.
Yeah.
This is where I bought the place.
Yeah.
And so my house was like the last one in the line. None of the houses for half a mile on the street had were connected to sewer. They all had to have septic tanks.
Hmm.
I don't know why. They just made a decision. And then the house, like literally on the other side of the cul-de-sac from me, which is only 15 feet, and everything beyond that is connected to modern sewer. And so 2 years ago, I had to be connected. Like the septic tanks finally like died. It was time to connect the house to sewer.
Sure.
And all of the companies that I talked to, they all had the exact same number of weeks delay before they could start work.
Yep.
The reason was there's like one company, one guy in this whole area. There's like 500,000 people living in the between Greensboro and Winston-Salem, and one guy owned the truck and sort of the drill that could go underneath and do the sort of like horizontal drilling to connect one property to where the sewer system was, and his truck broke.
And he was doing it
And
all.
until it was fixed, none of the other companies that do all of the other work on top of that, like, I mean, I think it was like 8 companies that I called.
So
None
there
of
was your
them could
specialist.
do their jobs.
Your specialist
And
holding
I'm
up
thinking,
the.
that guy has got a niche, right? I mean,
Dude.
that's
Yeah.
perfect,
Yes.
right? Every one of those other companies is hoping and praying that his machine gets fixed as fast as possible.
I see a lot of that, and I think this is a good conversation for a big reason
Yeah,
because one of the limiting factors to pretty much any outsourcing is always going to be logistics.
yeah,
You may be dependent on that guy who comes and, creates the tunnel to the piping. You may be held back on um, uh, an issue with time zones because you may have somebody who's working with you on the other side of the earth that's doing something that you need the next day. Logistics are always going to be a big part of the outsourcing equation, and
yeah,
that's one thing you really have to hammer into place.
yeah,
So I think in kind of going through the whole exercise, to me, a couple things stand out. Obviously, a big one is logistics. The secondary one is, what does the end result look like to your customers and clients? Because you'd like it to be seamless and for them to not even realize that anybody is doing any outsourcing for you.
yeah,
And that's especially big on the labor side, especially if they're interacting with your clients in some way, shape, or form. Like maybe they're members of your help desk or they're members of your creative team, that kind of a thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the concept that all profit stems from inefficiency, either
Yeah.
profiting from the fact that the inefficiency exists and continues to exist, or profiting from eliminating the inefficiency. But all
Correct.
profit, in one way or another, comes from inefficiency.
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, logistics is obviously a big area for most businesses as far as figuring out ways to optimize and make it more efficient. You
Those are
almost
the
never benefit from inefficient logistics.
No, those are the two that like really stick out in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
it's a
mean,
good
benefiting
idea.
from or profiting from an existing inefficiency and hoping it stays inefficient. I mean, it's not immoral or invalid. I mean, it gets a bad reputation in economics. You'll sometimes see it called rent seeking, right? It's like you buy that one property once, and then Starbucks and rents it for 15 years, and you haven't contributed anything. Supposedly, you just bought the property once, and then it's just rent seeking, right? Or trying to keep people from moving into your profession by putting in extra licensing requirements that are kind of silly for the kind of work they want to do, and all kinds of stuff, right? All that,
There's a
but,
lot of
but
that.
but still, they're making money from it, so they're profiting from inefficiency.
Hmm.
And then on the flip side, most businesses think that the only way to make money is to figure out how to eliminate an inefficiency. But it's perfectly technically valid to
It's very
avoid an
valid.
inefficiency.
And you bring up a point. Usually licensing is put in place because of issues of quality control or consistency.
Yes, but it
Right.
always, like everything, and it's a pendulum, and it goes too far.
Right. Yeah,
And
it's
then
sometimes it can go too
ultimately
far.
it gets too bad and it has to swing back.
So if we had to add a third one to the equation, it would be consistency. Whatever you put in place should be consistent in its outcome and its
Yeah.
acceptance. Or
Unless you're on the truly creative side. and then the lack of consistency is what you pay for, right? If
Yeah,
you go to a
right,
$500 a meal restaurant, their claim to fame is not that you're going to get exactly the same meal as you did 3 years ago. The way that if you go to McDonald's, you get exactly the same hamburger you would have gotten 3 years ago,
right. They're
right?
consistently inconsistent.
Yes, there you go. Or it's inconsistently
They're
consistent. Either
consistent.
way, you're
Either way,
paying for the
it's a winner
uniqueness
for
of it and
them.
not the consistency of it.
Yes, there is that that
All right, my friend.
factor. Yes,
I think it's time to move into our weekend.
sounds good.
And then next week, we'll talk about the new idea that we have around LinkedIn video. I'm looking
Yes,
forward to that. Once
me
we work
too.
out the details on that, I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
I think so too. I like the idea.
All right. All right. Thank you, John. Bye,
You're
John.
welcome.
Bye,
Bye bye.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
See